So we haven't had a lot of requests. The only thing for the BAA that we've really looked at or were asked to consider was that funding for Bridges to Health that we talked about last week. And I think partly that's because collectively the organizations that we often hear from recognize that we are in a tighter budget situation, that there's less money and that there are other the federal issues, obviously property taxes. So a question for the committee is, having heard a little more testimony on the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program, whether we want to send a letter to the Appropriations Committee, as we've done in the past, saying, you know, we support this, and encourage them to include it in the BAA. It doesn't mean that our recommendation in and of itself won't be enough to do that, but without a recommendation, I think it's unlikely that they would consider it. So anyway, I welcome any reactions or thoughts people might have.
So you might know this, but in the governor's recommend for the BAA, there's nothing for this, Vermonters Feeding Vermonters.
I believe that's correct.
Okay.
And yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
I guess I would just say, I wish that we had fully funded it in the first place. Appropriations felt they couldn't do it. I think it's worth trying again. And if we put in a request for 1.5 million and appropriations feels like they can't do all of it, maybe they'll give some of it. If we don't put forward something, we know that none of the funds are going to go to farmers, and none of the funds are going to go to people looking for food in this way. And so it feels to me like it's worth a try for us to send a letter and say, we think this is a valuable program that has a double benefit to people that we represent in our committee, and we hope you can fund it. That's my leaning.
Chair, are you looking for a motion or just consensus?
I think we can do this by a straw poll. And Jed, if you want to.
So
that's fine.
I will record that.
Okay.
Just for the record, and not as clerk, but I support Rep. Boslin's proposal, and I would certainly support it of that 1.5.
You cannot receive if you do not ask.
Okay, any other thoughts? So would somebody like to formally move then that we recommend to the House Appropriations Committee $1.5 million in the budget adjustment?
You want me to say all that, just exactly what he said?
That's fine.
I so moved.
I think Jed's there, and I'll amend that to say, and that we ask Ledge Council to help us draft that. I don't know to put that in there, but I'll say that because I am going to ask Bradley. Okay, so thank you. Any other discussion?
You got a second?
So I think our rules expert has
Straw polls.
yeah, so we don't need a second. That's and it's because we use Mason's rules.
Mason's, that's right, not Roberts.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
So Mason was less of a.
Well, the basis of that is
To have the
everyone
man.
has the right to have their position considered, regardless of whether anyone else agrees.
So
We all hear
that's why you need a
people.
second.
So-
Okay. All right,
If we're ready for this.
Let's go ahead then.
This is the 20th of January 2026, and the committee
346.
sends a letter of support for $1.5 million request for Vermonters Feeding Vermonters for the budget adjustment consideration to the Appropriations Committee. It's really a straw poll for a letter. It's not a bill or amendment. So if that's clear to everyone, John L. Bartholomew, how do you vote?
Yes.
Michelle Boswell,
Yes.
Gregory Greg Burt,
Yes.
Jed Lipsky, yes. Richard Nelson,
Yes.
John O'Brien,
Yes.
see Truth doesn't exist. Chairman David Durfee,
Yes.
with Casey Tooth no longer in the body, is he a one or a zero?
Yeah, I think you can, well, thanks Representative Tooth for his time in the legislature and then take him off the list. So
So now we just count as seven.
So the vote tally is 7 yes, 0 no, 0 ayes.
Yeah.
yeah.
I just had a question for, in general, just with Greg voting in for a program that potentially pays for sports.
So I think that, good question. I think that we've heard in our training, and we could have Ledge Council, speak to this too, that, short of program that is, Vermonters feeding Greg Burt, I think that it's a.
Is it a Greg Bird feeding Vermont?
That we could go. That it's, there isn't an issue, but there is, Greg, you can talk to, anyway, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be addressing.
I just wanted to flag it.
No, yeah, no, I totally understand.
Michael Grady has in the past, I think, spoken to this, and it's the way that particular rule or section or whatever it is written. Maybe John, you have more insight into this too, but I think it's not an issue in this case.
Yeah, if it, as you said, if it was Vermont, Greg Burt was getting all the money, he'd have to recuse himself, but because it goes out to many places.
Belongs to a class of participants.
Yeah, but exactly, like I can vote on issues that affect farmers as a whole, even if it
Benefits you.
benefits me.
Yeah.
Then I can vote against it if it affects me, but affects farmers as a whole, so.
But I could see if it was only going to 3 farmers, then we'd have to be in, I don't know where someone would decide that the pool is too small. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
I think the day I came and saw your farm and visited there, the gleaners were there that day.
That's right.
Fall, cleaning up. It was maybe the day or two after you had closed for the season.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, good. Thank you, everybody. I think glad to have had that conversation.
By the way, your apple pie had Greg Burt's apples.
So I'm aware of that, for the record.
So Dave, how soon can we send a letter down? From what I recall, it was super time
So
sensitive.
we're gonna have Bradley working on that and we'll do it ASAP.
Okay, all right, awesome, because from what I gather, they're like ready to.
Yeah, they're not.
What? Today would be, apparently, I've heard very recently that today would be good.
Yeah. Yeah. But in the meantime, I wouldn't mind joining us to refresh our memories a little bit on the municipal regulation of agriculture. And I had asked, do you have Zoom connection?
I do, yes.
Okay. I'd asked Ledge Council to just give us some very simple, straightforward language that if we were not to do anything else, to have as a baseline for restoring us to the world we lived in prior to the Supreme Court decision. The Taft Road.
Taft Street.
Taft Street, maybe, Taft Street. Decision. So we have this on our webpage and we'll also pull it up on the screen and just have Bradley then walk through the language and give us something to think about, help anchor us for tomorrow when we're taking this up again with, tomorrow it'll be the League of Cities and Towns coming in. Thanks.
So I'm Bradley Showman, Office of Legislative Counsel, and up on the screen, I have drafted some language here that would revert to the pre-Taft Street status quo, Taft Street being the Supreme Court decision we've been talking about the last few weeks. And so the holding in that decision said that the statute that we're looking at here on screen only said that bylaws under this chapter shall not regulate the required agricultural practices. And it was the notion prior to this decision that the regulation scheme was much broader. And what we thought before Taft Street was that farming that meets the minimum threshold criteria in the required agricultural practices rule and is subject to regulation under required agricultural practices cannot be regulated by municipal bylaw. So basically what this does is it just expands required agricultural practices and says that anything essentially subject to regulation under the required agricultural practices cannot be regulated by municipal bylaw. And in this section, I also just separate out construction of a farm structure is authorized under the required agricultural practices rule. And then the rest of this stays the same. I just changed the numbering here. In the definition section, I just broke out farming from the subsection of farm structure. It was all just squished together. And we wanted to make it clear that farming has the same meaning as in statute to capture as much activity as we can. Now, if this language were placed in a committee bill, for instance, we would want an intent section in the very beginning to explain what the reason this body is passing the law is, what it's in response to, and how the court should interpret the law to mean that farming activities subject to the required agricultural practices shall not be regulated by bylaw.
Pretty straightforward. Representative O'Brien?
Probably a discussion for another day, but where does housing for farm workers fall in, titles? Because like farm structures, right, are mentioned, but then it specifically pulls out for human dwelling. I don't know if you got into that in your farm labor study group.
Go ahead, Chris.
Start a little bit, I mean, well, like the H2A and H2B, well, H2A programs are federally regulated. So I don't know about like placing, but like, you can technically, have a camper for your H2A employees, during.
But I wonder
Summer
if you
months, but-
built a dormitory for your HSA workers, would that
Don't know.
structure, or was that a human dwelling?
Yeah, I just know that there are parts of that that are federally regulated. I don't know about the placement, like on the land of the structure. Actually, it does have to be away from. There is language about how far it is away from the area of, wetland even, and things like that.
And
So it's partially federally regulated, is all I know.
and just to be clear here, the definition of farm structure excludes dwellings meant for human habitation, right? So this subsection does not prohibit a bylaw from regulating a dwelling for human habitation on a farm. And so that always has been, it could still be subject to municipal bylaw regulation.
Yeah. I just noted that the language on line 7 that's crossed out there in the existing statute, as those practices are defined by the secretary, that we're no longer saying that in the new language, and whether there's any reason to think that we should, whether it's extraneous or whether by rewriting it, we've made it not necessary.
Took that out because it's not necessary when the language we use to replace it is construction of a farm structure as authorized under the required agricultural practices rule, which is a rule that is issued and shepherded by the Secretary of Agriculture, Food and Markets. So this ties it more toward what we thought the practice was prior to Taft Street, which is if the construction of a farm structure is authorized pursuant to the required agricultural practices rule, then it will be exempt from municipal bylaw.
I was actually thinking of it more with connected with Part A and the practice. So again, in the existing language that we're proposing to strike out, as those farming practices or the required agricultural practices were defined. But
And I see your question, and I think the same logic applies in the situation. So we're tying it to the required agricultural practices, which was our thought and practice prior to the Taft Street decision. And having the language in there as defined by the Secretary of Agriculture, Food and Markets is not needed in the situation. It's more clearly tailored the statute to saying farming that meets the minimum threshold criteria in the required agricultural practices rule and is subject to regulation under the required agricultural practices rule. We're trying to make it as clear as we can to say that anything that is subject to regulation under these rules is exempt from municipal bylaw. One thing that this does not do is it doesn't change or address anything with relation to cannabis. Taft Street did concern a cannabis farmer, and this doesn't touch any cannabis rules or anything of that sort. Cannabis is regulated differently than other kinds of agriculture or agriculture period. But I just want to point out that this does not address anything related to cannabis. And then so anything that Taft Street would have changed relative to cannabis would still be in place.
What about accessory on-farm structures that we heard about last year? Is this a place to tackle those now, or is that something that I think it hangs down in Senate Ag anyway, but
right, and I think that
or does this cover it?
no, I don't think it does. But that's in a different title
Okay,
of statute. So that's in the Act 250 title, which might be Title 10. I forget the numbers, but we will be having an opportunity to look at that later.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
John, yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
On top of page 2, farming has the same meaning as in 10 VSA. What is that meaning briefly?
Yes, I can pull it up. I'm going to change my sharing so I can come up on the screen. I'm going to unshare and then reshare the screen. Okay. And so I'm showing the definition of farming under statute, which is broader than in the required agricultural practices. So the statute that we've drafted does define farming this way, but it exempts municipal regulation by bylaw for farming practices that are subject to the required agricultural practices. And so this is the broadest definition of farming. But a somewhat more narrow definition of farming exists in the required agricultural practices, or excuse me, a somewhat more narrow scope of farming is subject to the required agricultural practices, because as we learned last week from Steve Collier's presentation, to be subject to the required agricultural practices, you might have to have a certain number of livestock. You might have to have a certain amount of gross receipts. You might have to have a certain amount of acreage. And so if you are subject to the required agricultural practices, you would be exempt from municipal agriculture, even if you were, raising livestock, poultry, fish, or bees.
So the definition that I just asked about is broader than the required agriculture. So the limiting factor here in terms of municipal oversight would be the required agricultural practices.
That is correct.
Farmers would have to follow those.
That is correct. That is correct. And one other thing to point out, and I'm sharing my whole screen, so you'll see me jump around now. And this might be something to talk about with the league, but these are some of the requirements that are in the required agricultural practices that would make you subject to the required agricultural practices rule, right? So if you have 100 laying hens, you're subject to the required agricultural practices rule. If you have 99, you're not. And, that was kind of an issue that the court brought up in Taft Street. 14 goats, you're not subject to it. 15 goats, you are. And there are other factors there too, like gross receipts, acreage, and things of that sort. But absent those other criterion, an individual in a town could have a number of animals that could be exempt from municipal bylaw regulation under the rule that we have as drafted. And just pointing that out, that the kind of scope of what is being prevented from regulation here.
So a 100 laying hen farm would be not subject to municipal regulation, but just 90 and even 99 would, and that's again, if you are selling $2,000 worth of eggs, then you are again. So if you had 99 hens, you're probably in the business, but.
I could see where a dozen hens would get, maybe not get you there too quick. $5 a dozen.
Yeah, it adds up.
Yeah,
Adds up.
400 days, they ain't gonna get 2,000, but if you slaughter your hens at the end.
200,000.
When the agency came in with some proposed language, they were suggesting changes to the required agriculture practices. Presumably, this will accomplish the goal of taking us back where we were without opening the wraps. Is that?
That is correct. This makes no changes to the
There's
wraps.
nothing in the wraps that would need to change to accomplish. I don't think there is. When I looked at them.
That is correct. There's nothing, the wraps do not necessarily have to change in order to accomplish this specific goal, which would be to revert to the pre-Taft Street status quo.
Yeah, so this is just reverting back to the status quo and yeah.
And I would be very interested if we move forward with this, of course, seeing what the legislative intent language would actually say.
Okay.
That's a good addition. That isn't here.
Okay, good. We can ask Bradley to work on that too. Greg?
Yeah, so I guess what do you mean by the legislative intent language?
Well, when Michael Grady was here, he talked about it. It's just to make it really clear to anyone, including the courts, what the legislative, because in my opinion, the legislative intent was clear and the court misinterpreted it.
Right.
So I think it's really important that we state what the legislative intent was when we did this and what we did and what we did before, decades ago.
you have another question?
No,
All right, good, so, I don't know. I don't think that we have posted yet because it's not on till tomorrow, the League of Cities and Towns document, is that right?
Yeah, it won't appear.
It won't appear, yeah. I think they did testify in the Senate, so if anybody is curious and wants to see what they had to say.
Or I can circulate, there's nothing that stops us.
Actually, yeah, well, if you wouldn't mind, just emailing to everybody, just if you want to take a look at it before they're in tomorrow, heads up. And then we'll have heard, oh, there's at least another group of farm organizations that wanted to come in and say something. But then I think we'll be ready to maybe dig in and figure out what we think we want to do.
They're coming in Thursday.
Yes. Oh, yeah. The league is coming in tomorrow and then we'll have stakeholder testimony on Thursday.
Yep.
And then maybe more stakeholder testimony at some point.
Are they coming in the afternoon during the TBD?
They're coming in Thursday morning.
No, I mean the League of Cities and Town, I don't see them.
The league is on
Good.
1:30, yeah.
Oh,
Wednesday.
I see it now.
Wednesday, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Good night. We'll see you tomorrow night.